This afternoon, a wave of federal immigration agents are headed here to the Bay Area, and they are expected to be stationed at the Coast Guard base in Alameda. Welcome, everyone, to the 4 this afternoon. I'm Alex Savage.
And I'm Heather Holmes. The operation is set to begin tomorrow as part of the Trump administration's effort to crack down on illegal immigration.
KTVU's Crystal Bailey is joining us now live from the Coast Guard base in Alameda with more on what we know so far about these plans. Crystal?
Yeah, Alex, Heather, it doesn't come as a surprise. You know, President Trump and Secretary Kristi Noem have been alluding to a large-scale enforcement operation in San Francisco for weeks now. And even though it's very quiet here at the base entrance, they are set to have some troops here in the next 24 to 48 hours. Now, this news of this large-scale operation does spark some reaction from Bay Area leaders who are already developing response plans for the immigration enforcement that we've seen at these courthouses over the last few months. And with more federal agents, we also might see some National Guard troops. In other cities like Portland and Chicago, the president has deployed troops to support ICE, which he says he will also do in San Francisco, something that California Democrat leaders are condemning.
The authoritarian playbook. You announced your intention to send the military to streets, doing domestic policing operations. You wildly overstate or completely make up crime statistics that are not real, that do not justify such action. And for this administration, you send first masked men to the cities that you want to militarize.
What our cities need, we need comprehensive commitments to ending both poverty and violence. Sending in our troops is not how we get there.
Now, the city of San Francisco is actively taking legal action. They filed its fourth brief in the U.S. Supreme Court earlier this week. And the city of Alameda is urging people to call their rapid response hotline if you witness ICE activity or need assistance. Now, there are a multitude of hotlines across the Bay Area. Here in Alameda County, that number is 510-241-4011. However, the other operating line numbers hours are from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And that list, many of those operate 24/7. Now, the San Francisco mayor Lurie says that he has just signed an executive order to hopefully support immigrants during this process. He says the city is prepared. I'll have more on what he has to say at 5 o'clock. For now, I'm live in Oakland. Crystal Bailey, KTVU, Fox 2 News.
All right, Crystal, thank you for the update.
All right, and here's a statement now from the U.S. Coast Guard. It says, quote, "This support of DHS agencies continues the Coast Guard's operations to control, secure, and defend U.S. borders and maritime approaches. Through a whole-of-government approach, we are leveraging our unique authorities and capabilities to detect, deter, and interdict illegal aliens, narco terrorists, and individuals intent on terrorism or other hostile activity before they reach our border."
All right, joining us now to offer some more perspective on this operation and what it may look like is Hal Kempfer, former Marine intelligence officer and Homeland Security expert. Hal, always good to have you on here. We just heard the statement that Heather read here, and it's a reminder that the Coast Guard is under the purview of the Department of Homeland Security here. Do you think that's kind of the main reason why the decision was made to have this federal immigration operation based out of the Coast Guard base in Alameda?
Alex, I think that was a big reason because it is a DHS facility. Coast Guard is a component of the Department of Homeland Security. Yes, during times of war, or other times they can be federalized in many ways under Title 10, not dissimilar to what happens with the National Guard. But day by day, they're under a different title. They are federal law enforcement. In fact, they are a constabulary force. In fact, the only one we have in the U.S., although they do maritime. And so it's a secure place. It's surrounded by water. It just makes a lot of sense from a security perspective. They're looking at what happened in Portland. They don't want it down here.
Right, but also talk about the role of Coast Guard members when it comes to stopping illegal immigration.
Well, they do it on the high seas, or on the water. So if they come across a boat or if they see something where someone's coming ashore, anything like that, that is actually a pretty routine thing that the Coast Guard does when they board vessels and do other things, is they check the immigration status. So this is not something strange for the Coast Guard. But in this case, the base, Coast Guard Island, is actually hosting other DHS agencies, ICE, and then CBP, Customs and Border Protection, and support of ICE. And again, it's a base that's in a good location. It allows them to do what they need to do, and nobody's going to be really protesting at the fence line or the gates because, well, it's an island.
Yeah, let's talk about what we may see in terms of other military deployments here, because we've obviously been having a lot of back and forth and discussion about National Guard deployments here to the Bay Area. There's been talk, the president has mentioned this on a couple of occasions now. We still have about 300 National Guard troops that remain federalized here in California after they were originally deployed down to Southern California over the summer. How likely do you think it is that either some or all of those troops will be sent here to the Bay Area to support this large immigration enforcement operation?
I think that's actually a very probable scenario. They're already activated. They don't have to put them on orders, and they could shift them. You remember, those troops, about 200 of them, maybe up to 300, were being talked about being sent up to Portland when that original court order came out that said they couldn't federalize the National Guard to send to Portland. Well, then the White House looked at sending the California National Guard up to Oregon, and then it was the expanded court order, which has now been changed. But it's very likely they could come in. Now, they may or may not be set up on Coast Guard Island. They certainly could do that. And I imagine that they would have a similar role as what the federalized National Guard troops are doing in Southern California.
Hal, can I just go back for a moment to something that you said in terms of why the federal agents might be stationed at Coast Guard Island? And you mentioned that it is an island. Do you believe that is done, intentionally to maybe quell protesters or maybe not entice people to come and disrupt the operations?
Heather, I think terrain has something to do with it. And I think when they were looking at this, they looked at probably a variety of places. I mean, they could have looked at Camp Parks. That would be another place that I would look at if I was up there. But one of the things I would look at is Coast Guard Island. It makes it, on the one hand, it has the advantage of being an island. It's surrounded by water. Very difficult for protesters to get in and around the base. The other part is, though, there's not a lot of ways to get on and off the base. And I see that as a challenge, because if a lot of protesters do congregate there, this could cause a problem with regular Coast Guard operations, as their personnel need to get on and off the base. So we'll see how it rolls out. We'll see what happens. But I see an advantage for doing it. I also see a challenge for doing it.
Yeah, and we're trying to kind of read between the lines here with this Coast Guard statement here, because they also mentioned trying to stop illegal immigrants and drug trafficking is what they sort of allude to. They say before they reach our border. I wonder if we can take anything away from that in terms of what the focus of this immigration enforcement operation might look like here in the Bay Area, if this is less about, raids happening at workplace sites and more about trying to catch drug smuggling boats off the coast.
Well, I think they can look at that. The Panga boats haven't really been coming all the way up to San Francisco. I think a few got pretty far north. I don't recall if they got all the way up to San Francisco. But there are ships and boats that do come in. There are other things that offload off our shores that boats can transship onto boats that come into the San Francisco Bay Area. So they may, along with the ground component of this, you might see a more enhanced maritime component. Again, they haven't said this. They haven't quite delineated what that will look like, just kind of general that they're going to try and stop before it comes in. But one can infer that they might be a little more aggressive in that. And you might actually see more enforcement at the airports as well, various airfields and things trying to interdict drugs. There's a variety of ways they could go about doing this. So I imagine we'll see just about everything.
Yeah, again, those federal agents set to arrive at any moment, and the operation expected to begin tomorrow. Hal Kempfer, really appreciate it as always. Thank you.